I agreed to seduce Alessandro Vitale because I needed revenge, and because my mother needed to survive. To me, he was the man who had destroyed my family. Cold, dangerous, impossible to fool. But when I tried to play him, Alessandro smiled as if he already knew everything and trapped me in his game before I could run. Every meeting became a risk. Every touch became a doubt. And the closer I got to the enemy, the more I began to want the one person I was supposed to hate. But when the truth came out, would he save me or destroy me? Chapter 1. The Wolf's Smile. The mirror in the dressing room of the Vitale Hotel gave me back a woman I didn't fully recognize. Blood-red silk dress, bare back, hair pinned in a low bun that took 40 minutes to look effortless. It was the wrong dress for the right job, and that was the private joke I made with myself as I adjusted my earring and pretended my hands weren't shaking. My phone buzzed for the third time on the counter. I didn't need to look to know who it was. "I'm listening," I said quietly, tucking the phone between my shoulder and ear. "You know what you need to do?" Marco Bellini's voice came muffled, as if he were in a moving car. "Say it back to me, Sophia. I sleep better when I hear it." I swallowed the urge to hang up. I thought of my mother in the hospital, of the oncologist's new report, of the numbers I could no longer cover on my own, even working until dawn every day of the week. I thought of Leo. Always, in the end, I thought of Leo. Find Alessandro Vitale, isolate him, plant the bug in his office, upstairs, when he goes up for the private closing meeting, and disappear before midnight. No face, no name, no trace. Good girl. Marco paused. When this is over, your mother will have the best doctor money can buy in New York, and you'll be able to look at your brother's photo without feeling like he's calling you a coward. The line went dead before I could answer. That was his specialty, hanging up while leaving the knife stuck in. I retrieved the bug, thin as a grain of rice, and hid it inside the lipstick. I snapped the cap shut harder than I needed to. The dressing room door opened without warning, and Bia Moretti walked in cursing and dragging a tray of glasses. "Hey, Sophia, swear to me the hotel sommelier isn't related to the waiter who spilled champagne on the mayor's dress last year. Swear on your mother." "I'm not swearing anything on my mother," I said, turning to her. "And the sommelier is his cousin. You're the one who confirmed the resume, remember?" "Lies." Bia stopped in the middle of the room, set the tray on the table, and looked me up and down. "Wait, that dress isn't a dress for someone who's working. That's a dress for someone who's hunting." I smiled without it reaching my eyes. "It's a dress for someone who needs the guests to remember the party tomorrow. It's a dress for someone who's going to give 2 or 3 cardiologists a lot of work." She crossed her arms, her gaze sharp. "You've been off today, Kane. You've been off since last week. You want to tell me about it?" For a second, I wanted to. I wanted to sit on the dressing room floor with Bia and tell her everything, from Marco's phone call to the exact figure still missing from the hospital bill. But what I was carrying wouldn't fit inside a friend. It fit inside a vault, and the key to that vault had been buried with Leo. "I'm great. Go check on the sommelier. Come on." Bia twisted her mouth, hesitated, decided to leave it for later. Before leaving, she stopped at the door. "Sophia, if you ever need to, I know." The door closed. I stood there, staring at the mirror one more moment, counting to 10 so the knot in my throat would go down. Then I went to work. The ballroom was exactly at the point I wanted. Low lighting, restrained jazz, tables in a horseshoe facing a small stage where later someone would pretend to improvise a rehearsed speech. The Vitale Hotel was all velvet and black marble, and I knew every inch because I had designed the event 3 months earlier without any idea who signed the check that paid me. Now I knew. Now I could see. Alessandro Vitale appeared in the ballroom through the door opposite mine, and it took me 2 seconds longer than it should have to pull my eyes off him. Black suit, no tie, collar button undone, hands in his pockets. His dark hair combed back as if the entire night would obey him. 36 years seemed too few for the kind of silence he carried. I had studied him for weeks in photographs. It hadn't prepared me for the effect of him in the same room as me. "Miss Kane." Don Matteo appeared at my side without my having seen him arrive. Old, short, an impeccable gray suit, eyes that seemed to know the contents of my lipstick. "Don Matteo, the sommelier is 2 minutes late." "I've already handled it." "You always handle things before the problem even happens." He tilted his head slightly. "That's a rare quality." I smiled politely and looked away, feeling the heat rise up the back of my neck. When I looked up again, Alessandro was watching me from the other side of the ballroom. There was no disguise. He looked like someone checking a detail that didn't match the rest of the room. I moved through the night greeting the right guests, correcting the right waiters, smiling at the right angle. I worked until the dim light blurred, and the whole time I knew exactly where Alessandro was. I knew when he had switched glasses. I knew when he had laughed. Just once, briefly, at something Don Matteo said. I knew when he left the ballroom through the back door toward the service corridor. That was the signal. I waited 2 exact minutes. I gave a generic instruction to the kitchen staff and slipped out through the same door. The service corridor was narrow, with walls of more sober marble, warm light from the sconces landing in round patches on the floor. It smelled of white flowers and the coffee someone had spilled earlier. I knew the private elevator was at the end, to the right. That's where I walked. Low heels, contained steps, my heart beating to a rhythm that didn't match my breathing. I reached the bend and stopped. Alessandro was there, leaning against the opposite wall, waiting, hands in his pockets, shoulder against the marble, as if the bend had belonged to him the whole time and I was merely the delay. I swallowed hard and feigned surprise. Mr. Vitale, sorry, I was checking the pantry. You weren't. His voice was lower up close. It had a controlled rasp, something between whiskey and a warning. Excuse me, the pantry is on the other side, Miss Kane. He pushed off the wall with a movement that looked lazy and wasn't, and you know that. You designed the event. I held his gaze. It was the first instinct I had trained for this night. Don't lower your chin. Showing a wolf you're small is the fastest way to become dinner. I was checking the dessert route. Dessert comes out on the west side. Did you memorize the ballroom floor plan? He smiled. It was a slow smile, one that started at his mouth and never reached his eyes. I memorized the floor plan of everything that's mine, Miss Kane. I took a step back without thinking, and my heel hit the corridor wall. Cold marble, ice cold even, cut through the thin fabric of the dress against my back. Alessandro matched the step to exactly the right degree, unhurried, without crowding me. We were a hand's width apart when he raised his arm and rested his hand on the wall beside my head, closing off my exit. Let's agree on something, he said quietly. I'm going to ask you one single time. You're going to answer me with the truth. After that, we both know where we stand. My heart was up in my collarbone. I felt my pulse beat where the dress dipped low. About what? About you. He smelled of something woody, cold, expensive. He wasn't touching me, but his warmth crossed the air between us as if the distance were more symbolic than real. I'm your event planner, Mr. Vitale. You are, and I don't understand what. Do you want to play with me? The line came out slowly, as if he had waited days for the exact shape of those 6 words. It wasn't the question of a confused man. It was the question of a man who already knew the answer. I froze. I didn't answer. I couldn't. He tilted his face a little, just enough for his mouth to be level with my ear without touching. I felt his breath hit my neck. I asked you whether you want to play with me, Miss Kane. I'm not playing, I whispered. Lie. The word dropped between us and stayed. I don't know what. You do. He pulled back a millimeter, just enough to find my eyes again. I know you know, and I know what you brought in your lipstick. And I know who sent you here tonight. It was as if someone had opened a window in the dead of winter. The cold of the marble behind me stopped being marble, and became the only thing keeping me upright. I opened my mouth to deny it. No sound came out. Alessandro watched me patiently, like someone giving the lamb time to understand the fence had been closed before it even arrived. There are 3 paths now, he said. The first, I hand you over to the men downstairs and you don't make it to breakfast. The second, I turn you into the police today. The third, he paused just so I would have to ask. The third? The third is my favorite. He smiled again, slowly. You stay. I blinked. Excuse me. You stay close to me, where I can see you. The hand on the wall dropped a fraction, 2 fingers grazing the fabric of my sleeve without touching skin. Tomorrow, at 9 in the morning, a car will be outside your building. You'll get in it. You'll come up to my office, and the 2 of us will have a conversation about your new job. I don't need a. You do. His voice hardened slightly, without rising. Your mother does. I felt the air rush out of me all at once. He knew about my mother. You don't. I know everything, Miss Kane. I know the doctor's name. I know the cost of the next session. I know what Marco Bellini promised you, and I know what he has no intention of delivering. His mouth was too close to mine. His eyes were the wrong color for the kind of fear I should have been feeling, and that was exactly the problem. Why are you doing this? My voice betrayed me, coming out low, because I recognized something in you. What? Pain. The word crashed over me with a weight I didn't expect. I tried to look away. He didn't let me. He stayed a hand's width from me, hand on the wall, the heat of his body cutting through the air, and me pressed against cold marble that had stopped protecting me. "Tomorrow, at 9, he repeated quietly. "Don't make me send Rocco to get you. He has the mood of a graveyard before coffee." He pulled away slowly. He took his hand off the wall. He took one step back, then another, and for a second the whole night seemed to have fit into that gap between his breath and mine. "Good night, Miss Kane." He turned and walked to the elevator without looking back. The doors slid open silently, and he stepped in with the same calm he'd shown while waiting for me. The doors closed. I stayed leaning against the corridor wall, unable to move, with the growing sense that I had walked into a trap I had set myself. And the worst part wasn't being recognized. The worst part was that, for half a second, when he said the word pain, I had wanted to tell him exactly who I was. Chapter 2. The Velvet Collar. I woke up before the alarm and lay staring at the ceiling of my room until the morning light cut the wall in two. I hadn't slept. I had only closed my eyes in intervals and seen, behind my lids, his hand on the wall beside my head, fingers spread, the gold ring on his pinky, the white cuff of his shirt folded back to the wrist, details the brain records when the rest of the mind is trying to flee. The phone read, 8:45, 15 minutes. I got up. The apartment in Hell's Kitchen was far too small for the kind of thoughts I needed to have that morning, and the kitchen smelled of the coffee I'd forgotten to take out of the filter the night before. Acidic, old, the smell of a night that hadn't gone as planned. I washed my face with cold water until my skin stung a little. I put on black tailored trousers, a white silk blouse, low heels. I dressed the impeccable professional the way someone puts on armor over skin that's still trembling. In the bathroom mirror, I rehearsed the neutral expression 3 times. On the third, it was acceptable. When I came down, the black car was already parked in front of the building. It wasn't a discreet model. It was discreet, precisely because it was too expensive for anything on that street. The kind of car that vanishes from people's memory because no one wants to admit they can't have it. I stepped through the gate, and a big man, with shoulders too broad for the sleeve of his jacket, opened the back door with a courtesy that didn't match his face. "Miss Kane." "Rocco, I presume." "You presumed right." I got in. He closed the door firmly and precisely, without slamming it. He sat at the wheel and pulled out without another word. The car's silence was upholstered, muffled, the kind of silence that costs money. We crossed Manhattan at the hour when the city was still rubbing its eyes. I passed through the east side, saw the hospital from far away, its faded beige facade between 2 newer buildings, and looked away before it could hurt. I thought of my mother waking up now, of the nurse adjusting the IV, of the way she pretended to sleep well so I wouldn't worry. I thought about this every morning, and every morning pushed it back into the same deep place where things go when they can't be solved yet. I thought of Leo. It had been spring too, 8 years earlier, 5 in the afternoon, low sun, phone ringing, and on the other end a voice saying the name of a hospital I didn't know. I pushed the memory back to the place where it lived. 3 minutes to go, Rocco said, without turning. "Thank you. Coffee with milk today. Better mood. Miss Kane." I looked at the back of his neck. I didn't answer. He didn't add anything either. His mouth didn't move, but something in his eyes that I caught in the rearview mirror almost made me laugh. I swallowed the almost. It wasn't the time. The Vitale building sat in the heart of Midtown, tall, sober, with black marble on the facade as if night had decided to lodge there in the form of a building. Rocco stopped at the side entrance, opened my door, and walked me to a private elevator, where he tapped a card against the reader. The panel jumped straight to the number 47, without passing the others. "He's waiting for you." Rocco stepped back and folded his hands in front of him. "Miss Kane, you're not coming up. I stay where I'm useful." The elevator rose silently. I saw my reflection in the polished steel, chin raised, shoulders aligned, eyes with a light I didn't recognize as mine, and told myself, quietly, that I had already survived worse things than that floor. It was a lie, but it worked long enough for the door to open and for me to step out with my posture intact. Alessandro Vitale's office took up the entire floor. Floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 walls, all of Manhattan spread out beyond like a board he had personally arranged. The morning light came in at an angle, cutting the space into golden bands that landed on the pale marble floor without warming it. In the center, a dark, solid wood desk. Behind it, him. White shirt, no tie, sleeves folded to the elbow, hair freshly combed back. He was reading something when he heard the elevator, and he looked up with the same calm as the night before, as if he hadn't spent the night thinking about anything, as if I were just another item on an ordinary Tuesday's agenda. "Good morning, Miss Kane. Mr. Vitale." "Sit." I sat in the chair across from him. On the desk, 2 cups of black coffee and a closed leather folder. He pushed one of the cups toward me without asking how I took it. Sugar on the left, sweetener on the right. His eyes dropped for an instant to my hand. "You'd take it black." I looked at him. "How do you know?" "I observe." I didn't touch the cup. I crossed my legs, adjusted my posture. He noticed every movement without stopping his stare, and there was something in the way he stayed completely still while assessing me that was more unsettling than any aggressive gesture could have been. "Let's get to the point, Miss Kane. I want to offer you a position. I'm not looking for a job, but you're going to accept this one." He opened the folder and turned a 2-page contract toward me. "Coordinator of Institutional Events for the Vitale Group. You report to me. Your partner, Miss Moretti, keeps your company intact and gains access to my network of corporate clients. You start Monday." I read the salary. I read it again. It was 3 zeros more than what I made in a whole year of hard work. I felt the heat rise up my neck and forced myself not to blink. "Mr. Vitale, last night you suggested 3 paths. I understood which one you chose, but this isn't a job. This is a leash." He smiled slightly, and this time the smile almost reached his eyes. "A velvet leash." He rested his elbows on the desk, pressed his fingertips together. "Would you prefer the other one?" "I prefer the truth." "All right." He tilted his head a fraction. "The truth is that if you walk out of here without signing this paper, Marco Bellini will come looking for you by tomorrow night to understand why you failed. He won't wait for a second chance. He'll cut your mother's money on Thursday, and he'll send someone to your door on Friday. I can stop both." "Why?" "Because once you sign this paper, you become my problem, and I solve my problems." I looked at the contract. I looked at him. The coffee cup still sat between us, and the steam rose silently, thin, as if even the air in that office had learned not to make abrupt movements. "What do you want in return?" "That you do your job, well, the way you do it for any other client. That's all. That's all." "I don't believe it." "I didn't ask you to believe it, Miss Kane. I asked you to sign it." For a second I wanted to get up and leave, but the building, the city, the man on the other side of the desk, and the hospital bill added up to a math that allowed no exit. I picked up the pen. The tip touched the paper, and I made a point of not hesitating, because hesitating would give him the satisfaction of seeing that my hand was steady only in appearance. I signed the first page. I signed the second. I pushed the paper back. He took the folder without checking the signature. Good. First order of business. End-of-month cocktail for the hospitality sector. 24 guests. The terrace of our building on 5th Avenue. You have 3 weeks. He took another folder from the drawer and pushed it toward me. Briefs in here. Open budget. I want the vendor list on my desk Wednesday. Wednesday morning or afternoon. Morning. It'll be there. I know it will. I stood. He stood at the same time, came around the desk with his usual calm, and stopped half a meter from me. Again, the symbolic distance. Again, the air between us cut through by something that had no contractual name, and that I refused to name. Miss Kane. Mr. Vitale. One last thing. He slid one hand into his trouser pocket, and the other rested lightly on the edge of the desk. While you work for me, you don't work for anyone else. Do you understand what I'm saying? I understand. Good. He stepped back half a pace. Rocco will take you back. I walked to the elevator, feeling his gaze on my back until the steel door closed. Inside, I pressed the button for the ground floor and let out my breath slowly, silently, like someone emptying a lung they didn't know they'd been holding. Downstairs, inside the car, I picked up my phone. Bea had sent 14 messages. I called. "Sophia Kane." She answered on the first ring, shouting, "You got promoted to the Vitale group? You what? How do you already know this?" "The whole office got a welcome email 15 minutes ago, with your name, and your title, and a photo of you I didn't even know existed." "What do you mean you got hired, Kane?" I closed my eyes. He had sent the email before I even signed, before I got into the elevator, probably before I left the house. "And we'll talk when I get there. You're going to tell me everything. I'll tell you what I can." I hung up. Another message arrived at the same instant, from a number I had memorized and never saved. "Marco. Heard about the promotion. Good girl. You're closer than I expected. Don't disappoint me." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Marco thought I had advanced 1 square on his board. He had no idea another hand had flipped the whole board over during the night. Rocco parked in front of my building. He got out, opened the door. Before I stepped onto the sidewalk, he said, without looking at me, "Miss Kane." "Yes. Today's lunch goes up at 12:30. Don't forget." I frowned. "What lunch?" "Yours." I went up to the apartment confused, with the brief under my arm and my phone in my pocket, buzzing with more messages from Bia that I didn't have the energy to open. I took a shower. I sat on the couch with the folder's contract open in my lap, and pretended I could read it while the city clamored outside through the half-open windows. Horns, footsteps, the spring wind carrying the smell of coffee and wet asphalt. At exactly 12:30, the doorbell rang. It was a delivery man in a Vitale Hotel uniform, with a tray covered by a silver steel cloche. He asked to leave it on the kitchen counter with a trained politeness, and left before I could ask anything. I lifted the lid. The steam came first, dense and fragrant, with saffron and Sicilian lemon, a smell I hadn't smelled in 8 years, and that hit something inside my chest before I even saw the plate. Gold-colored risotto, lemon zest on top, exactly the way my mother made it on Sundays when Leo was still alive, and the apartment still had the noise of people in it. I sat down slowly on the counter stool and stared at the steam rising. No one in Manhattan knew this was my favorite. No one alive, except the woman who was sleeping at that moment in a hospital room 3 kilometers away. I picked up the fork. My hand was shaking. Alessandro Vitale had lured me into his own den, and now he was reminding me, silently, that he knew exactly where to press. Chapter 3: Months on the Razor's Edge. Summer came to Manhattan the way it comes to every office on the 47th floor. Filtered, controlled, at a temperature no one chose. I learned the rhythm of the Vitale machine before the first month was out. I arrived at 9. I left after 10. Between 1 hour and the next, I planned cocktail parties, charity dinners, hotel openings, and 2 benefit auctions for hospitals no one in the Mafia had the nerve to visit. On paper, I was the Vitale Group's event coordinator. In my head, I was the woman who still sent false information to Marco Bellini every Thursday, with a knot in my stomach and my heart beating at the wrong pace. Alessandro let it happen. That was what bothered me most. He knew I lied. I knew he knew. And even so, he received my reports with the same cold courtesy with which he signed million-dollar contracts. He read them. He returned them. He marked with his pen a point that needed adjusting. Always the right point. Always the point that proved he had understood the whole lie before the second line. "You mixed up the ballroom number," he said one Tuesday night, without looking up. The meeting had already run 3 hours. I stood in front of the dark mahogany desk, my feet aching inside the high heels Bia had sworn were comfortable. The window behind him showed all of Manhattan lit up. Small, like something he had placed there as a gift to himself. The city's light came in, filtered through the tempered glass, and settled on his shoulders with a kind of elegant indifference. "Ballroom 2, I answered. "Ballroom 3. "Ballroom 3, I repeated, and wrote it down. He finally looked up. His eyes were the exact color of the whiskey he drank unhurriedly. A warm brown that looked like care but was attention, pure attention. No tenderness, no distance. The kind of gaze that stayed on you even after the room went dark. "Sophia, Mr. Vitale." Sit." I sat. That's what happened for weeks. I sat. He watched. At some point between the first and third hour of the meeting, the office light dimmed on its own, and his shadow grew larger on the wall. The silence between us wasn't discomfort. It was something else, denser, with edges neither of us touched on purpose. The Vitale's closed restaurant became another board. It was a place 2 blocks from the building, with no sign, no name on Google, with a single old waiter who served in silence and understood there were conversations he shouldn't hear. The floor was dark stone, the candles were low, and the aroma of garlic and aged wine was soaked into the walls in a way that seemed deliberately welcoming. Alessandro took me there for work, dinners twice a week. He'd sit across from me, choose the wine without consulting me, and let me talk about schedules I knew he had already approved 3 days earlier. "You don't eat," he said one night, at the end of July. "I eat. You cut. You move the fork. You don't eat." I looked at the plate. Saffron and Sicilian lemon risotto, served in a deep white porcelain dish, the citrus aroma rising lightly in the air between us. The same dish, always. He had understood on the morning of the first contract, and had never forgotten. It was silent care, dressed up as coincidence, and it hurt me in a way I couldn't name. "I'm not hungry." I lied. "Eat," he said. It wasn't a request. It wasn't an order. It was his voice, low, 2 tones below normal, and I ate. He watched me eat with the wine glass held still between his fingers, without drinking. Then he ordered more wine for me. Outside of there, I texted Marco and told him what he wanted to hear, that the Mafia boss was at my feet, that the bug had been installed, that documents would come soon. Marco always answered the same thing, in different codes. Faster, kitten, the treatment money depends on you. Your mother depends on you. And my mother really did depend on me. I found her in a new hospital room at the end of August. A private room, with a wide window and morning light hitting the bed. The walls painted a white that didn't smell of disinfectant like the corridor outside. Helena Kane, my mother, far too thin, with short hair and eyes that were still hers, smiled when she saw me in the doorway. She was lucid. She was well. Who paid? I asked the nurse, and my voice came out too firm for a question. The nurse looked at me like someone who wasn't authorized to answer. I left the room. I crossed the corridor, and it was there, near the service door where the air smelled of disinfectant and reheated coffee, that I saw Alessandro Vitale coming out of my mother's room. He was in a dark suit, no tie, his right hand tucked in his jacket pocket. His broad shoulders filled the corridor in a way that seemed to shrink the space around it. He didn't look surprised to see me. He stopped 3 steps from me and waited, with the calm patience of someone who has never had to justify himself. I didn't ask, I said. My voice trembled on the last syllable. I hated it. I know. I don't want to owe you anything. You don't. Alessandro. Sophia. He said my name the way he had learned to say it, unhurried, without weight, like a word he had decided to protect. I hated that too. Why? I asked. He looked at me for a long second. He slowly raised his hand, without theatrics, to the height of my elbow and stopped in the air before touching. He didn't touch. His hand stayed there, suspended, as if he had asked permission without a word, and had decided on his own that the answer was no. The corridor was quiet. Somewhere inside, a monitor beeped once and went silent. "Because she's your mother," he said, and lowered his hand without touching me. He walked down the corridor. I stayed there, leaning against the white wall, with my heart at the wrong height again, and I realized I was ashamed of wanting to cry. I went back to the room. My mother smiled again. She held my hand with her thin hand and looked at the door he had gone out through. "What a man," she said simply. "Mom, daughter, I'm sick, not blind." I laughed. It was almost crying. Helena squeezed my hand. "He has gentle hands," she said. "I noticed when he fixed the blanket. A man like that is rare. Mom, he isn't what you're thinking." "I'm not thinking anything, daughter." "I'm looking." I left the hospital with my head heavy and my chest tight in a way I preferred not to examine. Marco called in the cab. He spoke fast. He spoke loud. He said the sentence I had been dreading for 2 months. 2 weeks, kitten. Concrete documents. Or I cut off the treatment money and the old woman dies alone in a public hospital corridor. Are you understanding me? I understood. Bia understood without my saying it. That's what scared me most. She showed up at my apartment one night in September with a bottle of wine and a closed expression I had never seen on that woman, and I had known her long enough to know that a closed expression on her was serious business. "Sit," she ordered. I sat. "No," she cut me off. "Sit for real." I sank deeper into the couch. The apartment was cold, the window half open, and the damp smell of autumn beginning to come in through the gap. "In Sophia Kane," she began, and looked at me with her green eyes narrowed. "I've known you since you were 19. I know when you're lying to me because you're ashamed of worrying me." "Bia, shut up. I'm not finished." I shut up. "Something's wrong," she said slowly. "Something's been wrong for months. You don't sleep. You don't eat. You laugh when you need to laugh, and go silent when no one's looking. I'm not going to ask you what it is, because you won't tell me, but I want you to know that I know." She poured the wine, pushed the glass toward me. "And if at some point you decide to tell me," she said, without looking at me, "I'm already here, before the word. Okay?" I couldn't answer. I drank the wine. She stayed with me until dawn, and slept on the couch with her shoes on the floor, the way she'd slept since college, mouth slightly open, and the calm breathing of someone who didn't carry heavy secrets. The following week was worse. Alessandro called me to a meeting in the office on 47 one Wednesday night. When I walked in, I found Don Matteo in the leather chair in the corner, with his impeccable gray suit and his hands resting one over the other in his lap. He had a face that seemed to have seen wars, every wrinkle in the right place, every line built by decisions I preferred not to know. His eyes rose to me unhurriedly, with the calm assessment of someone who has already formed an opinion before you open your mouth. "Miss Kane," he said. "Mr. Matteo. Sit, please." I sat. Alessandro was standing behind the desk, the lit window at his back, and the whole city shrunk down below. "Don Matteo is my counselor," Alessandro said. "He keeps track of everything that matters." "Do I matter?" I asked, and the sarcasm came out before good sense. Don Matteo smiled slightly, a small smile, contained, from a man who had laughed a great deal and never loudly. "You matter," he answered. The meeting was short. We talked about the benefit auction, the new hotel in Boston, a meeting that would take place on a Thursday at the Brooklyn warehouse. Alessandro said the name of the warehouse with the same indifference he used for anything. I wrote it down. The blood drained to my feet. When I left, Don Matteo walked me to the elevator. Without saying a word, he pressed the button for me. He waited with me in the corridor, hands clasped behind his back, his silence with a texture of its own. Just before the door opened, he spoke, and his voice was the calmest thing I had ever heard in that building. "Miss Kane, Mr. Alessandro is not easy to love." I looked at him. "I don't love him," I said. Don Matteo kept looking at the elevator door, as if the answer were no surprise at all. "I know," he answered. "For now." The door opened. I stepped in. I looked at him from inside the elevator, and he tilted his head with the exact courtesy of a man who had survived 3 decades in the same place. The door closed. I went down alone, with his voice still in my ear. I got back to my apartment at dawn. My phone buzzed on the nightstand before I lay down. "Marco," a coded message, but I already knew the rhythm. "Tomorrow is the day. Warehouse. Take what you can. Hidden camera in the brooch. If you come back empty-handed, your mother won't last the month." I sat on the edge of the bed. I looked at the white ceiling. I thought of Alessandro's hand suspended in the hospital corridor, of Helena's hand in mine, of the way Don Matteo had said the word, love, like someone saying an old and much-used word. I picked up the brooch Marco had delivered 2 days earlier by a faceless messenger. I looked at it in the palm of my hand. It was small, golden, round, with the camera hidden behind a fake stone that tried to look like amber and couldn't fool anyone who looked closely. I closed my fist around it. Tomorrow was the day, and I still didn't know, that night on the edge of the bed, that the warehouse in Brooklyn had been chosen neither by Alessandro nor by Marco. It had been chosen by the shooters who were already on their way. Chapter 4. The Body is a Shield. The car left the Vitale building at 4 in the afternoon on a Thursday in October. The sky was clear, that Manhattan autumn blue that looks painted by someone who has never lived through a real winter. A blue that deceives, too beautiful to be honest. Rocco drove with both hands on the wheel and the rearview mirror adjusted so I could see his eyes, but he never looked at me. Alessandro was beside me in the back seat, his jacket open, the cuffs of his white shirt folded twice, and the onyx ring with the initial V gleaming every time he turned his wrist to check his watch. The brooch was on my lapel. It weighed like stone. "You're quiet," he said, without looking at me. "I'm thinking." "About what?" "About the November cocktail." I lied. He turned his face slowly and looked at me in profile. I felt the gaze before I saw it. It was his usual gaze, attentive, warm, unhurried, in the way of someone who had decided long ago not to rush me, the kind of attention that wears you down from resisting because it never attacks. It only waits. "The November cocktail," he repeated, low. "You're good at lying, Sophia, but you're not good enough for me." I didn't answer. I looked out the window. The bridges appeared on the left, gray steel cut against the blue that was beginning to darken at the edges. Brooklyn grew larger in the windshield like a warning I already knew by heart, and insisted on ignoring. The warehouse sat on the riverbank, high ceiling, zinc roof rusted at the edges, a gray concrete yard with old oil stains, containers stacked in 3 rows forming a narrow corridor in the middle. The air smelled of stagnant water and metal warmed by the afternoon sun. Rocco stopped the car at the entrance. 2 Vitale men opened the iron gate with a heavy creak that echoed across the whole yard. Alessandro got out first. He held out his hand to me without looking. I took his hand and got out. His hand was warm. I had never really noticed it before, that Alessandro Vitale's hands were always warm, regardless of the temperature of the air. We walked between the containers. He spoke quietly with Rocco about a delivery that was supposed to arrive in an hour, his voice calm and precise like someone reviewing a shopping list. I looked around, feigning disinterest, noting the height of the main warehouse windows. the shadow the containers cast on the ground, the possible exits. The brooch burned on my lapel as if it knew exactly what it was going to be used to do. That was when the first shot went off. The sound came from above, from the zinc roof of the main warehouse, or from a high window. I never knew for sure. The second came before I understood the first had been a shot. The third came before I finished understanding the second. Rocco shouted a word I didn't catch. Alessandro grabbed me by the arm with a force that hurt down to the bone and pulled me behind the nearest container. We fell together onto the concrete floor. Him on top of me. His body covered mine entirely. The weight was real and firm, his chest against my back, his elbows on the floor beside my shoulder so as not to crush me with all he had. "Don't get up," he snarled in my ear. The shots continued. 5, 6. I lost count after the 7th. The metal of the container beside us vibrated with every impact. A sound of wounding that I felt more than heard, passing from the metal to the concrete floor and from the concrete to my body. Rocco returned fire from the other side of the yard with more spaced out, more calculated shots, from a man who knew where he was aiming and wasted nothing. Alessandro had one hand on the back of my neck, the other on the floor, beside my shoulder, holding up his own weight. His chest rose and fell against my back in short, controlled breaths, exactly the way he controlled everything, as if even fear had a cadence he refused to lose. I smelled him up close, whiskey and cedar, and something metallic that must have been blood before I was even sure it was. "You're hurt," I whispered. "Don't talk. Alessandro, don't talk, Sophia." His voice was the firmest thing I had ever heard in any language. It wasn't a shout. It didn't need to be. I closed my eyes. I pressed my forehead against the cold concrete that smelled of dust and river. I felt his hand tighten on the back of my neck, fingers firm as an anchor, as if he were afraid I would try to get up or disappear or do anything other than stay quiet and alive. When the shots stopped, he didn't get up. He waited. He waited for the silence to last long enough to be silence itself, not a pause. Only then did he roll to the side, pull me by the arm with a care that contrasted with the earlier force, and get me to my feet. There was blood on his white sleeve. Not much. Enough to turn my stomach. "Car," he said to Rocco, his voice identical to before the shots. Rocco appeared out of nowhere, as he always did, gun still in his hand and the expression of someone who had solved a minor household problem. "Clear?" Rocco said. "Car," Alessandro repeated. We got into the armored car in seconds. Rocco tore off. The concrete yard and the iron gate vanished behind us. I was shaking so much I had to hold Alessandro's hand with both of mine to keep my teeth from chattering. He noticed. He covered my hand with his other one and stayed there, in complete silence, while the car crossed the bridge back to Manhattan, and the river below reflected the first purple of dusk. "Where?" I asked, and my voice came out hoarse, as if I hadn't used it in days. "Penthouse? I need to go home. Penthouse. Sophia." I didn't have the strength to argue. The private elevator in Tribeca opened straight into the apartment. High ceiling, exposed concrete walls, floor-to-ceiling glass with all of Manhattan pulsing outside in orange and graphite, as if the city didn't know, or didn't care, about what had happened on the other side of the river. He walked to the dark leather couch, took off his jacket, tossed it over the back. The white shirt had a red stain on the left shoulder, the size of a large coin, already drying at the edges. "Sit," he said. "You sit. You're the one who's bleeding." He looked at me, and for the first time in months, I saw something crack inside him. It wasn't anger. It wasn't exhaustion. It was the delayed fear, that specific fear you can only feel after the danger has passed and the body understands it survived. He sat on the couch. I went to the kitchen. The counter was black marble, cold under my palms when I leaned on it for a second. I washed my hands. I opened 3 drawers until I found a first aid kit that looked too new to have ever been used. I came back. I knelt in front of him, on the dark rug between the couch and the coffee table. I unbuttoned the first buttons of his shirt with fingers that insisted on trembling, and he stayed still, arms loose, neither helping me nor getting in my way. The wound was shallow, a graze that had passed too close and had bled more than it had hurt. I cleaned it with gauze. He didn't make a single sound, not even when the gauze touched the flesh directly. "Why didn't you push me behind you before the shots started?" I asked, without looking at his face. I kept my eyes on his shoulder, on my own fingers, because there wasn't time. "Why did you throw yourself on top of me, Sophia? Why?" "Alessandro." His hand rose slowly. It touched my chin with 2 fingers. It lifted my face until I had to look into his eyes, and there was no way not to look when they were those eyes, brown and warm and completely defenseless in that moment, because I wouldn't have been able to breathe another single day of my life if that shot had hit you. I broke down. It wasn't pretty crying, with elegant tears and contained silence. It was 8 years of dammed-up crying that found the first crack and came out whole all at once. It was the crying for my brother Leo at 16 on the asphalt of a street I never wanted to know, for the phone ringing at 3 in the morning, for my mother's voice on the other end saying his name once and then stopping. It was the crying for my mother losing her hair 2 years later, for the money disappearing, for the promise I made to Marco without fully understanding what I was promising, for the cold brooch on my lapel, for the icy concrete under my face while his body covered mine. It was everything at once, without order, without control. He pulled me onto the couch, to his side, and I cried against the chest that was still bleeding lightly under the fresh gauze. "Leo," I said, at some point, when the words finally came back. "I know. No, you don't know. I came to kill you because of him." "I know, Sophia." I lifted my head. His face was close, closer than I expected. The warm brown eyes were red at the edges, and that scared me more than any shot that afternoon, because Alessandro Vitale wasn't the kind of man who ended up with red eyes. "Since when?" I asked. "And since the gala. You knew everything. I knew your brother's name, the date of the shooting, the hospital where your mother is admitted, the name of her doctor, Marco's salary, and the number of months it would take you to get desperate enough to accept anything." He stopped. He breathed in deeply, slowly. "I kept you close for 2 reasons. So Marco couldn't get to you before I understood the size of what he was putting together. And because I recognized your pain before you even opened your mouth in that corridor." "How?" I whispered. "Because it's the same as my sister's, his sister, the woman he had never mentioned, but whom I had felt present in every one of his silences since the first day, in every moment he looked at me a second longer than necessary. I saw it in his face now, the old grief, the same as mine in weight and shape, hidden for years behind an expensive suit, and a voice that didn't waver. "She died," I said, and it wasn't a question. "She died," he answered. We stayed silent. The clock on the concrete wall marked a time that no longer mattered to either of us. Outside, Manhattan stayed lit, indifferent, as always. "Sophia," he called. I want you out of this, but I already know you won't agree to go." "I won't." "I know." It was slow. It was the slowest thing that had happened to me in 8 years. His 2 hands on my face, his thumb passing over my cheek with a lightness that seemed impossible in those hands, his mouth finding mine with a care that hurt in a way I had no name for. All the months fell into that kiss at once. The risotto he had sent up without saying anything, the hand suspended in the hospital corridor that never touched me, the specific, unmistakable way he said my name when he wanted me to pay attention. I held his shirt. I felt the gauze under my palm. I remembered he was hurt and pulled back a few centimeters, my forehead still against his. "You're hurt," I whispered against his mouth. "It doesn't matter." "It matters." He laughed. It was a short laugh, low, almost silent, born from somewhere inside his chest that he rarely let show, and it was the first time I heard Alessandro Vitale's laugh for real. He pressed his forehead against mine and stayed there, breathing the same air, unhurried. "Marco is going to come after you," he said, after a moment. "Now, soon. I know. I won't let him. I know." We stayed like that. I couldn't say for how long. The Manhattan night lit up whole behind the glass, thousands of yellow and white windows that made the city unrecognizably beautiful from up there. At some point he leaned in and kissed my forehead, slowly, his lips lingering there for 1 long second, and it was more intimate than everything that had happened before. That was when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I looked. He looked. We both knew who it was before the screen lit up. Marco. A coded message, but the code had already become a second language in my head, automatic and cold as breathing. Documents in his office. "Tomorrow. Plant them, or your mother won't last the month." I stared at the screen. The letters stayed still, too sharp for the state I was in. Alessandro's hand found mine under the cold light of the phone, and he didn't say a word. Chapter 5. The Lie That Falls in Layers. Morning came gray through the window of the Tribeca penthouse, and I woke up before the alarm with Marco's message still burning behind my closed eyes. Documents in his office. Tomorrow, or your mother won't last the month. I felt the weight of Alessandro's arm on my hip and, for one short second, pretended that second lasted a whole lifetime. I got out of bed without making a sound. I found my clothes folded on the armchair. Someone had come up with them during the night, probably Rocco, probably without asking. I dressed in the bathroom, avoiding the mirror. Marco's bug was in my bag, inside a little lipstick case just like the one from the night of the gala. The fake documents, in a brown folder hidden in the lining. I had two options, and neither served. When I came back to the bedroom, Alessandro was already sitting on the bed, barefoot, his hair tousled for the first time since I had known him. The bandage on his left shoulder showed under the collar of his white shirt. He looked at me like someone who had read a whole book in 3 seconds. "Coffee," he said, low. It wasn't a question. "I need to go to the office," I answered, and my voice came out firmer than I felt. "I have a meeting with the new catering team at 9. He kept looking at me. There was no reproach, no sarcasm, just that look of someone who had decided to let me lie one more time, because he already knew where the lie was going to take me. "Rocco will take you," he said, and got up from the bed. I wanted to say something about the night before, about Leo's name spoken by that mouth, about his hand on my face, about the low laugh that had escaped him for the first time in front of me, but the brown folder inside my bag weighed like stone, and I swallowed it all. The car pulled into the Vitale building's garage at 8:30. Rocco opened my door with his usual butler's courtesy. "Miss Kane," he said. "Coffee with milk on the floor." "Thank you, Rocco." He tilted his head half a centimeter. It was the biggest farewell that man had given me in months, and it hurt, as if he knew everything. In the private elevator, I pressed the 47th. I looked at my reflection in the mirrored door and barely recognized myself. I was 20 when I buried my brother. I was 28 when I stepped into that elevator to destroy the man who had begun to fix me. Somewhere between those two numbers, I had become a woman capable of planting a brown envelope inside the drawer of the man I'd slept with the night before. The floor was silent. Alessandro's assistant hadn't arrived yet. The double door of the office was ajar, the way he left it on days when he told the staff he'd come in later. I pushed it slowly. The room was empty. The mahogany desk, organized as always. The morning sun came in through the 3-meter glass and struck the signet ring with the initial V that he had left on top of his planner. Forgotten, or planted, I couldn't say. I walked to the desk. I opened the first drawer on the right. I took the brown folder out of my bag. "Miss Kane." I froze. The voice came from behind, and I didn't even need to turn to know he had come in through the door leading to the adjacent room, the door I had never seen open before. Don Matteo was sitting in one of the corner chairs, a coffee in hand. He didn't get up. When I raised my eyes, Alessandro was standing in front of me, on the other side of the desk. He wasn't wearing anger. He was wearing something worse, calm. The brown folder slipped from my hand and hit the wood with a dry sound. "Sit," he said. I sat. He placed another folder on the desk. Between the two of us, thicker, older. "Open it." I opened it, and the ground of my whole life began to collapse in slow motion. Inside, photos of me, leaving the building where Marco had first received me, getting into his car, documents from my mother's treatment, with the payments traced, some coming from a Bellini family front account, others from an account I didn't recognize, one that had begun depositing 3 weeks earlier, anonymous, too generous. Transcripts of messages between Marco and someone referred to only as the old man. The last transcript was a single sentence. "When she delivers, we erase them. Mother and daughter. No witnesses." I looked at Alessandro. I tried to speak. Nothing came out. "He was going to kill you," Alessandro said, and his voice was without temperature, without tone, without anything. "After the delivery, along with your mother, to make it look like it was me. I've known this for 4 weeks. 4 weeks, I repeated, and the word came out hoarse. 4. Don Matteo remained silent in the chair. He drank his coffee. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, and the venom in my voice was the last I had. "Why did you let me—" "Because you wouldn't have believed me," he cut in. "Not me. Not 4 weeks ago. You needed to get here on your own. I needed to know whether you were going to plant it. And if I had planted it?" He looked at me for one long second. "I would have taken the folder before you left the floor, and I would still be here, now, telling you what I'm telling you." I swallowed, and my throat hurt like glass. Why? Because I said I don't let go of what's mine. It was the line from the gala, the line from the service corridor, when he had blocked the way with his arm and whispered in my ear for the first time, I remembered every millimeter of that night. The wrong dress, the lipstick with the bug, the fear mixed with fascination that had sprouted in me without permission. I covered my face with my hands. I didn't cry. I had cried it all out the night before, at the penthouse, telling him about Leo. There was no liquid left in me. "Sophia," Alessandro said, and it was the first time he had called me by name inside that room. "Get up. Look at me." I looked. "I'm not going to turn you over to the police. I'm not going to send you away. I'm not going to lock you in here. You have 3 paths. You can take this folder now, walk out the front door, and I'll guarantee you a flight anywhere you want, with enough money for your mother to finish her treatment at a clinic in Geneva that not even Marco can reach. That's the first path. What's the second? You stay. You work. You pretend you planted it, and we use what you are to him against him." Pause. "This path costs you the most. You'll have to walk into that room with Marco one more time, wearing a bug that will be ours. You'll have to hear everything he has to say and not react. You'll need him believing until the last second that he won." "The third," he tilted his head a millimeter, "the third is the one I won't offer you. You disappear, without protection, without money, and try to survive alone. I mentioned it so you'd know it exists, and that it's not an option." Don Matteo finally spoke, from the corner, without lifting his cup. Mr. Alessandro forgot to mention the fourth. His voice was gravel. "The lady can choose to stay, not because she needs to. She can choose to stay because she wants to." I looked at him. I looked at Alessandro. I looked at Marco's brown folder on top of the desk, on my side, and at Alessandro's old folder, on his side. 2 options written on paper. 2 lives I could have from then on. "I'll stay," I said. "Not for the money, not for my mother, for me." Alessandro closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. When he opened them, something in him had given way. Minimal, contained, but real. Don Matteo raised his cup in a silent toast and went back to drinking. The door to the adjacent room opened again, and Luca walked in talking before he saw who was where. "Aye, bro, I know you hate it when I come in without knocking, but the Brooklyn warehouse system has crashed 3 times since yesterday, and I think we've got a bigger problem than—" He stopped. He looked at me. He looked at the folder in the middle of the desk. He looked at Alessandro. "Ah, yes," said Alessandro. "Ah," Luca repeated, and ran a hand through his hair. "She's in? She's in. Cool." Luca pulled up a chair and sat down. "So, almost official sister-in-law. Welcome to the chaos. I'm the annoying brother nobody asked for, but that you need. I hack things. I'm going to hack Marco. I'm going to hack him good." "Luca," said Alessandro. I know. Discretion. Silence. Dark tie. Blah blah." He looked at me. "Sophia, seriously, I've suspected you since the 2nd month. I thought I was going to have to watch my brother die of heartbreak. I'm glad I won't. Not in the short term, at least." I almost laughed. It was the closest thing to a laugh my body had managed since the night before. "Thank you," I said. "I think. You're welcome." He turned to Alessandro. "Can I help in my own way? Like, leave the digital part to me. You two handle the human drama part I don't have the patience for." Alessandro looked at him for a second. Then he nodded, very slightly. "In your own way." Luca clapped once, got up, and left through the adjacent door, saying something under his breath about caffeine and firewalls. Don Matteo got up too. He came to the desk, stopped beside me, and rested his hand for a second on my shoulder. It weighed like a blessing. "The lady," he said, "does not shoot. The lady protects." He left without waiting for an answer. I was left alone with Alessandro. He came closer for the first time since I had walked in, rounded the desk slowly, and stood beside me, without touching me. "Bia," I murmured. "Bia needs to know. Something. Not everything, but something. She'll find out by the smell if I don't say anything. Tell her what you need to. No Marco's name, no Leo's name in here. An edited version." I nodded. I took my phone from my pocket. I called. Bia answered on the 3rd ring, and her voice arrived already loaded with sarcasm. "Kane, I've been up since 6 in the morning because your new catering coordinator thinks truffled mushroom is a vibe, and I really need some good news." "Bia," I said, "I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. But there are some things happening in my life that I can't tell you right now, and I need you to trust me anyway." Silence on the other end. Long. "Are you alive?" "I am." "Are you in danger?" "Less than yesterday." "You son of a bitch." Her voice trembled once, went back to normal. "Okay, I trust you. But when this is over, you're going to tell me everything, and I'm going to cuss you out for about 3 straight hours. Deal. Deal. Love you, you lunatic." Love you. I hung up. Alessandro was still beside me, without touching me, waiting. I stood. He turned to me. For a second I was afraid he was going to kiss me right there, under the cold light of that office, and for another second I wanted him to. He did neither. He took something from the inner pocket of his jacket and placed it in my hand. I felt the metal before I looked. It was a key. Small, golden, worn from little use. It's not for the bedroom, he said, low. It's for the apartment. You already live here, I answered, not understanding. It's for another apartment. One I never showed you. A place I bought 2 years ago and never managed to live in. It has books, a kitchen no one has used, a good window. Pause. For when this is over, for you to decide whether it's yours too. I closed my hand around the key. The metal was cold and warm at the same time, the way only metal carried by another person can be. Why now? Because you stayed. He looked at me. Because I had already put that key in my pocket this morning, before you walked into this room. I was going to give it to you no matter what. His phone buzzed on the desk. He read it without expression. Marco, he wants to see you tonight. Closed restaurant. Says he has a surprise. I looked at the key in my hand. I looked at him. Then let's give him a surprise. Chapter 6. Trapped here with him. The Vitale's closed restaurant was on a narrow street in the West Village that seemed designed not to be found. A smoked glass window, a door with no sign, only a small wolf engraved on the dark stone frame. Rocco opened my door without a word. It had started snowing lightly in Manhattan, the first late afternoon of November with that smell of winter arriving ahead of time, damp and cold in the lungs. Miss, said Rocco, good luck. You think I need it? I think Mr. Marco needs it more. I almost smiled. It was the day's involuntary joke, and it came at the right time. I climbed the 3 stone steps. Alessandro was somewhere behind the ballroom's false mirror, with Luca on the earpiece, with Don Matteo in another room, with men positioned at every exit. The new bug, theirs, was sewn into the lining of my coat, undetectable even to me. The old one, Marco's, stayed at the apartment, inside a drawer. I no longer needed to carry poison with me. I walked in. The dining room smelled of wood polish and wine no one had poured yet. A single lit lamp illuminated the table at the back, and the rest was plunged into shadow. Marco was already sitting there, a glass half full and the smile of someone who thinks he's clever. He always dressed too expensively, the kind of man who confuses price with elegance. He stood when he saw me, as if we were at a legitimate business dinner. Sophia, he said, what a pleasure. Marco, I sat. I refused the glass the waiter offered. Marco laughed, as if the refusal were cute. You look different, he said. I like it. That wolf did you good. Why did you set up tonight? Direct. I like that too. He leaned forward, and in his movement I saw the vanity of a man who believes he's winning. I set it up because you're taking too long. I need results, kitten. Your mother doesn't have a month. I planted the folder this morning. The lie came out smooth. I felt no guilt at all in saying it. Marco laughed again, this time heartily. I knew it. I knew you'd deliver. I knew from the first day you were too good to lose. He spun the glass between his fingers. You know what the funny part is? I never thought Vitale would fall for it. I thought he'd read you in 3 seconds and toss you out the window. Then he offered you a job, and I thought, the old wolf's gone soft. He hasn't gone soft, I said quietly. No, then why am I about to beat him? I looked at Marco, at his confidence, at the too much gel in his hair, at the way he propped his elbow on the table as if he owned it, and I thought of Leo, of my 16-year-old brother who had left home one autumn night and come back inside a black bag. I thought of the 8 years I had spent believing that the man who slept with me the night before was the one who had pulled the trigger. Marco, I said, I need to understand one thing before I continue. Anything, kitten. Why Leo? He stopped the glass in the air. What do you mean? Why? Why him? Why choose my brother? Why that night? Marco looked at me for a second too long, and what came next was exactly what I needed. He underestimated me. He thought I was already his. He thought confessing was a luxury he could afford. Ah, that, he shrugged, and the casual gesture made me clench my knee under the table. It was simple. Old Vitale, Alessandro's father, was closing an arms deal with some Russians. If that deal closed, my family would lose a whole root. I needed a war between the Vitales and any other group in Manhattan. Any of them. The Canes were what was nearby. Your brother stepped into the wrong place at the wrong time. It was nothing personal. Nothing personal. Business, Sophia. You know, I felt my stomach turn hard enough to make me swallow, but my voice came out firm. And recruiting me, years later? That was personal. He smiled. Vitaly had become obsessed with the dead Kane story. I heard about it. Word around was he was going to find out who did it. So I thought, what if the boy's sister comes to him on a silver platter, thinking it was him? 2 birds, 1 stone. You'd destroy Vitaly, and Vitaly, if he found out, would destroy you. I'd end up with Manhattan. I moved my hand across the table so he'd see the silver ring on my middle finger, an agreed-upon signal. Somewhere behind the mirror, Luca pressed a button. The recording was complete. "Marco," I said, "you know what the funny part of your joke is?" "What?" "I planted the folder, but I planted an empty folder." The glass stopped on the way to his mouth. "What?" "The folder I left in Alessandro's drawer this morning. The documents you sent me. They're there, but they have an addendum on the first page that I wrote myself, courtesy of Marco Bellini, with confession attached." He went pale. "Sophia, the attached confession is what you just told me," I finished. "I'm recording, Marco, and you just admitted you killed my brother over an arms root." The back door opened. Alessandro came in first, his steps slow and deliberate, of someone who doesn't need to hurry to intimidate. Don Matteo right behind him. Rocco closed the front door of the dining room and stood against it, arms crossed, impassive. Marco stood up so fast he knocked over the chair. "You, careful with the word," said Alessandro, and his voice was so low it frightened more than any shout. "Careful with every word that comes out of you from here on. Bellini." Marco looked around. There was no way out. He didn't have a single one of his men inside the building. Luca had brought down their communications 30 minutes earlier, and the 2 thugs waiting outside were under Rocco's aim on the street, unable to understand why their phones weren't working. "You're not going to kill me here," said Marco, and his voice had given way a millimeter. "There's a prosecutor. There are rules. You need—" "I'm not going to kill you," Alessandro cut in. "You're going to walk out of here. You're going to walk out under escort. You're going to a place where you'll be very quiet, for a very long time, with no internet, no visitors, no name. I don't need to kill you, Marco. I need you to disappear." "That's worse." Marco opened his mouth, closed it. 2 men came in through the back door. They took Marco without a sound. I didn't ask where. I decided, in that second, that I would never ask. When the door closed, I stayed sitting in the chair for a long time, the fingers of my right hand resting on the white linen tablecloth as if they needed something solid. The silence in the dining room had a different weight from the silence before. It was no longer dammed-up tension. It was the air that's left after the storm passes and you realize you're still standing. Don Matteo came closer, rested his hand for a fraction of a second on the top of my head. A grandfather's gesture, a godfather's, of someone who blesses without speaking, and left through the same back door. Rocco went out the other side. It was just the 2 of us under the back lamp. Alessandro came around the table. He sat in the chair that had been Marco's, turned toward me. We looked at each other in silence for a time I can't measure. "It's over," he said, quietly. "It's over," I repeated, but neither of us stood. "Sophia," he said, and his voice had changed, lost its steel. "I owe you an apology. So do I. For hiding that I knew who you were. For lying about who I was." He held my hand on the table. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was the gesture of someone who's tired, who's endured too much, who needs an anchor after a long time sailing without one. "Let's go home," he said. I stood. I took the apartment key from my coat pocket, the key he had given me that morning, that I had carried all day like a talisman. I placed it on the table, in the space between us. "Is it mine too?" I asked. He looked at the key. He looked at me. "Since this morning." I took the key back. I put it away. The Tribeca penthouse was silent when we arrived. Rocco stayed in the garage. Luca sent a message that just said, "Gonna sleep for a week. Congrats to you both." And I laughed for the first time all day. A short laugh. Surprised. Real. Alessandro took off his jacket in the hall and dropped it carelessly on the chair, the way someone does who has finally arrived somewhere he no longer needs to look like anything. I took off the coat with the bug sewn into it and left it on the armchair. He looked at me from across the room, and the distance between the 2 of us suddenly seemed impossible to bear. I walked to him. He walked to me. We met in the middle of the rug, and he pressed his forehead against mine, closed his eyes, and breathed deeply, as if he had spent the whole day holding his breath. "Stay," I whispered. He opened his eyes. He took my hand. He said nothing. He led me down the hall to the bedroom, slowly, as if every step needed to be agreed upon. The door closed behind us. I woke to the light of late winter, coming in softly through the kitchen window. A thin, golden, unhurried morning light. I put on his white shirt, folded the sleeve to the elbow, went barefoot to the kitchen. The previous day's snow had settled soundlessly on the Tribeca rooftops, and the world outside seemed suspended, too quiet to be real. Alessandro was in the doorway, in trousers and no shirt, watching me with that way of his of reading books in 3 seconds. The bandage on his shoulder had been changed during the night. His hair was still tousled, and I noticed for the first time a small scar he had just below the collarbone, from some time before my life. "Coffee?" I asked. "You first." I smiled. I poured 2 cups, his black, mine with a splash of milk. I brought his to him. He rested his hand on the back of my neck, before accepting the mug, a gesture he had never made before that morning, and that I knew, right then, he would repeat every morning from then on. "Good morning," he said, low. "Good morning." We stood in the doorway, in silence, drinking. Outside, someone on the street tapped a short honk. Someone answered with a longer one, and Manhattan kept being Manhattan, indifferent to the fact that inside that apartment something very old had finally settled. He pulled me close. I rested my head on his shoulder, the good one, on the right side. I smelled coffee and soap and him. I thought of Leo. I thought of my mother waking up in the hospital room at that same hour, and of the treatment session she'd have later, paid for by that man who was holding me without saying anything. I thought of Bia, of Luca, of Don Matteo, of Marco, somewhere, with no internet, no name, no visitors, of me, of the woman who had walked into the gala one spring night with a bug in her lipstick and had walked out of that trap at the end of winter with a key in her pocket. "You slept without nightmares," he said, near my temple. "How do you know?" "Because I did too." I lifted my face to look at him. He kissed my forehead, slowly, with the kind of care that doesn't match his reputation, and that I had already stopped finding surprising. That was when I saw the envelope. It was on the side table, next to the couch. Brown and sealed, no label. I recognized the crumpled corner. It was one of the envelopes he had taken from the inner pocket of his jacket on the night of the warehouse. When we came back to the penthouse, he had put it there, and never opened it in front of me. I had never remembered to ask. I thought about asking now. I looked at Alessandro, at his shoulder, at the scar, at the way he held the mug without letting go of my waist. I looked at the late winter light coming into the kitchen, at the coffee slowly cooling in the 2 cups. I didn't ask. I drank the coffee. I rested my head on his shoulder again. The envelope stayed sealed on the side table, waiting for a morning that wasn't yet this one.